Hello, everyone. I am Horror Horizon, and I'm here to help you today. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching right now. Get comfortable, relax, and let's dive into a story that might just keep you awake tonight. If you have any horror stories that have happened to you, please email us. The road to Hollow Creek was a serpentine ribbon of cracked asphalt, winding through dense forests that seemed to swallow the daylight whole. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. It was the kind of place where time felt irrelevant, where the past and present blurred into a single, oppressive moment. Priya Sharma gripped the steering wheel tighter as her car rattled over the uneven road. She had been driving for hours, and the GPS had long since given up, its screen flickering with static before going dark. The map she had printed out was crumpled on the passenger seat, its edges frayed from her nervous fidgeting. She was lost, and the fading light was doing nothing to ease her growing unease. The town of Hollow Creek wasn't supposed to be this hard to find. It was just a dot on the map, a forgotten relic nestled in the mountains. But as the shadows lengthened and the forest grew denser, Priya began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. She had come here for a reason, though, a reason that had haunted her for years. Hollow Creek was the last place her older sister, Anika, had been seen before she vanished without a trace. Priya was only 12 at the time, but the memory of that day was etched into her mind like a scar. The police had searched for months, but they had found nothing. No body, no clues, no answers. Just silence. Now, 15 years later, Priya was determined to find out what had happened. She had spent years poring over old case files, interviewing anyone who might have known something, and following every lead, no matter how faint. Hollow Creek was the end of the road, the last place Anika had been seen alive. If there were answers to be found, they would be here. The car's headlights flickered as the engine sputtered, and Priya's heart skipped a beat. Not now, she muttered, pressing harder on the gas pedal. The last thing she needed was to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. But the car had other ideas. With a final, shuddering gasp, it rolled to a stop, the engine dying with a pitiful wheeze. Priya sat in silence for a moment, her hands still gripping the wheel. The forest around her was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made her ears ring. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Of course. She glanced back at the car, then at the road ahead. The town couldn't be far now. She grabbed her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and started walking. Hollow Creek was a ghost town in every sense of the word. The buildings were weathered and crumbling, their windows dark and empty. The streets were overgrown with weeds, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was as if the town had been frozen in time, untouched by the outside world for decades. Priya walked slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She felt like an intruder, as if the town itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a wrong move. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of something. A voice? A laugh? She couldn't tell. It was too faint, too distant. She stopped in front of an old general store, its sign hanging crookedly from rusted chains. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Priya hesitated, then pushed it open. The interior was dark, the air heavy with dust. Shelves lined the walls, their contents long since rotted away. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she stepped inside, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. There was something about the store that felt wrong. It wasn't just the decay or the silence. It was the feeling that she wasn't alone. That something was watching her from the shadows. She shook the thought away and focused on the task at hand. She needed to find somewhere to stay for the night, somewhere she could rest and regroup. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A photograph, half buried in the dust on the counter. She picked it up, wiping away the grime. It was an old Polaroid, the colors faded with age. The image was of a group of people standing in front of the store, their faces blurred and indistinct. But one figure stood out, a young girl with long, dark hair and a familiar smile. Priya's breath caught in her throat. It was Anika. Her hands trembled as she stared at the photo. How was this possible? Anika had vanished 15 years ago, but the photo looked much older than that. The edges were frayed, the colors washed out. And yet, there was no mistaking her sister's face. A cold breeze swept through the store, extinguishing her flashlight. Priya froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness pressed in around her, suffocating and absolute. She fumbled with the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn back on. And then she heard it, a soft, whispering voice, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. Priya. Her blood ran cold. The voice was coming from somewhere behind her, somewhere in the darkness. She turned slowly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The store was empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. There was no answer, just the sound of the wind and the creaking of the old building. Priya backed toward the door, her eyes darting around the room. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, something just out of sight. She stumbled out of the store and into the street, the cold air biting at her skin. The town seemed even more oppressive now, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. She needed to find shelter, somewhere she could hide from whatever was out there. The house at the end of the street was the only one that looked even remotely habitable. It was an old Victorian, its paint peeling and its windows dark. But compared to the rest of the town, it was almost welcoming. Priya approached cautiously, her flashlight flickering back to life. The front door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open with a creak. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The furniture was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with faded photographs and old, yellowed newspapers. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The house felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if the walls were breathing, the floorboards shifting under her feet. She shook the thought away and focused on finding a place to rest. The living room was empty, the furniture covered in sheets. She pulled one off the couch, sending a cloud of dust into the air. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She set her backpack down and sat on the couch, her mind racing. The photograph of Anika was still in her hand, and she stared at it, trying to make sense of what she had seen. How was it possible? And why had it been in the store? She felt like she was missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle. As she sat there, the house seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and sending a chill down her spine. She felt like she was being watched, like something was lurking just out of sight. And then she heard it again, the whispering voice. "Priya." She stood up, her heart pounding. The voice was coming from upstairs. She grabbed her flashlight and started toward the staircase, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step feeling like an eternity. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow, the walls lined with closed doors. The whispering was louder now, more insistent. It was coming from the room at the end of the hall. Priya approached slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the wood, with what looked like charcoal. The floor was littered with old, broken toys, and in the center of the room was a small, wooden chair. And sitting in the chair was Anika. Priya's breath caught in her throat. Her sister looked exactly as she had the day she vanished, young, innocent, and so very real. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They were dark, empty, and filled with a sadness that made Priya's chest ache. "Anika," she whispered, her voice trembling. Anika didn't respond. She just stared at Priya, her expression blank. And then, slowly, she raised her hand and pointed to the corner of the room. Priya turned, her flashlight flickering. The corner was dark, but as the light hit it, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure, hunched and twisted, its face hidden in shadow. It was watching her, its breath coming in ragged gasps. And then it moved. Priya stumbled back, her flashlight falling from her hand and rolling across the floor. The figure lunged at her, its movements jerky and unnatural. She screamed, scrambling to her feet and bolting for the door. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around her. She could hear the thing behind her, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. She reached the stairs and practically threw herself down them, her heart pounding in her chest. The house seemed to come alive around her, the walls groaning and the floorboards shifting under her feet. She could hear the whispers now, dozens of them, overlapping and echoing in her mind. She burst out of the house and into the street, the cold air biting at her skin. The town was darker now, the shadows deeper and more menacing. She ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind racing. And then she saw it, the car. Her car, parked at the edge of town, its headlights flickering. She didn't question how it had gotten there. She just ran toward it, her legs burning with the effort. She reached the car and yanked the door open, throwing herself inside. The engine roared to life, and she slammed her foot on the gas, the tires screeching as she sped down the road. The town disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It wasn't until she was miles away, the forest thinning and the road widening, that she allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were still trembling, her mind racing with what she had seen. She glanced at the passenger seat, where the photograph of Anika still lay. And then she noticed something she hadn't before. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a date. It was faded, but she could just make it out. Priya's blood ran cold. That was impossible. Anika had vanished in 2008. How could the photo be from 1923? And then it hit her. The town, the house, the figure in the corner, it wasn't just a place. It was a trap. A place where time didn't exist, where the past and present collided in a nightmarish loop. And she had just escaped. Or had she? As she drove, the road seemed to stretch on forever, the forest closing in around her. The whispers started again, faint but insistent. And in the rearview mirror, she saw something that made her heart stop. Anika, sitting in the back seat, her eyes dark and empty. "You can't leave," her sister whispered. "You're one of us now." Priya's car was found a week later, abandoned on the side of the road. The engine was still running, the headlights flickering. But there was no sign of Priya. The police searched the area, but they found nothing. No clues, no answers. Just silence. And in the town of Hollow Creek, the wind still whispers through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. The houses stand empty, their windows dark and lifeless. But if you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of footsteps, the creak of a door, the whisper of a name. Because Hollow Creek is not just a town. It's a prison. A place where time stands still, and the past never dies. And once you enter, you can never leave. Thank you so much for watching. If this story sent chills down your spine, or made you believe in the unseen, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Let us know in the comments, do you believe in spirits, or do you think there's a logical explanation for these hauntings? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you never miss out on our next spine-tingling story. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes, the past never truly stays buried. Thanks for being part of our journey. See you in the next video.